Hello and welcome to Cruising and Musing. I am your host, Rob. We are not going to be cruising today because I wanted to have reference material at hand and, well, just can't be done in the cab of a car. And today's video is going to be a response to Dr. Souza's latest upload in which he discusses the transgender guidelines Ohio districts come up with. And he says that he supports it in spirit. And I kind of feel like, yeah, they've got the spirit. They're making some mistakes, but they've got the spirit on this. I have myself down here kind of a addressal of how I think it should be done to address this with the ideas of both respecting the students, respecting the parents. And obviously, I will be disagreeing with Dr. Souza on some points, agreeing with him on some points, agreeing with the school district on some points, disagreeing with them on others. And I'm coming at this as somebody who is non-religious. So let's just get that out there. I work as a teacher. And the district I work in, and why you're not looking at my face right now, is a district that is notorious for going after people that say things they don't like. And given the habit of me to use the district I'm in as an example in all their glory as a non-exemplar on how to do things, and the fact that I do publicly address things at school board meetings and in other aspects of running the district and arguing those meetings, we just don't want to give them something where they can easily recognize me without having to do any research, because let's face it, most of them that are on the school board currently are too incompetent to do some rough Google searches to figure out who I am and pursue it. So with that out of the way, I do apologize for the video in the background. I hope you enjoy some ocean waves, and hopefully this works a little bit better than the last time where it was all choppy. That's not meant to be a joke about the waves, but video quality. So getting right down into it, Dr. Souza feels that the district was doing the right thing with hiding, not outing students to their parents. And I myself, openly on his video in response, said that I feel that that is the absolute wrong way to go about this. I've recently done a video on, earlier today uploaded, in fact, and I have referenced this previously as well, I believe last Thursday, that the school districts really need to start earning the parents and the community's trust back again. And I had given a way that they could do this, and it would help the school district and teachers on Thursday by bringing community members and parents into the classroom again to help support teachers as class sizes go up following our continued teacher shortage and the worsening of it. Then earlier today, I posted a video where I was discussing all of the ways in which in the last 30 years that I've been involved in the school system as a student and a teacher, that I have seen the school system really give parents reasons not to trust it, starting from being a kid and the parents being kids up till today with them having children. In my observations, both of the parents, the children, teachers, like all the way through. I wish I could have been more detailed. I was in the car and mobile, and without being able to go live on my mobile phone, I have a limit of 25 minutes or so that I have not found a way to uncap. So I had to kind of keep it brief. So go ahead and hit subscribe if you haven't yet. The minute we hit 50 subscribers and I can do live streams from mobile, I can start being more thorough and not having to keep cutting videos and doing retakes in order to get myself expressed within the time limit. So my disagreement with Dr. Souza is that we can't hide this from the parents. When a kid says that, they are Susan and they now want to be Steve, or they are Steve and they now want to be Susan, we need to, take this, maybe not have the teacher do it, maybe have, at which point the student decides this, you send them to the counselor. The counselor then has the conversation with the student and the parent together to figure out what way that is going to be handled and move forward. Because at the end of the day, and this is, I'm just going to read my response. to Dr. Souza off the channel here. I have to fundamentally disagree on withholding information from the parents. Things like this policy is what leads parents to distrust the school system. This is referred to the policy of not informing the parents on children coming out with this. Statistics are in favor of LGBT students not being abused despite the statistically elevated risk compared to other students, meaning that whatever that percentage is, the vast majority of them will not be abused, even if they are statistically more likely. And this comes down to the point of, you can say 5% is 10 times more likely than 0.5, and 0.5 is 10 times more likely than 0.05. Until you have all those numbers in front of you, you can't really make that statistical comparison. But when the vast overwhelming majority of them will not be abused, you cannot work on the assumption that they will be. So it's so vastly more likely on orders of magnitude that they are not going to be abused. And if the abuse should happen, that is what the Department of Children and Families is for, and why teachers and school officials are all required reporters. AKA, if abuse does happen, we're going to call it in anyways. So, it doesn't matter if they're abusing their child because they're gay, transgender, or because they knocked over grandma's antique vase and broke it. If we see any evidence of abuse, we have to report it as it is. However, until it does happen, the parents, and the it in this would be the abuse of the child, until the abuse of the child does happen, the parents are innocent until proven guilty. That is the baseline of Western law, of American law, is that the accused is innocent until proven guilty. So regardless of any history they have up to that point, they are innocent and have to be treated as such, meaning that if these parents are historically the worst kind of Bible thumpers, if they are, Muslim immigrants and had previously thrown homosexuals and atheists off the roof of the highest building as prescribed by the Quran for them to do, we still have to treat them as being innocent under our laws until they are proven guilty of having violated those laws and abused this child in some way. Therefore, since they must be assumed to be innocent until the guilt is proven, it is not my place as a teacher, it is not the counselor's place as a counselor, the principal's place as administrator, nor the school's place at all as a government entity to treat them as though they are abusive until they actually demonstrate that they are being abusive, aka commit the act for which they can be found guilty. Anything else is a state-sponsored witch hunt for abusive parents in which they are unable to prove their innocence through a lack of guilt, i.e. they cannot prove that they're not going to do something. You cannot prove a negative, essentially, is the argument. Hence, I cannot prove the non-existence of God as an atheist, because no matter what I hold, you're going to be, saying, but that doesn't prove it. But that doesn't prove that won't change. So this is something that cannot be proven, and this is basically the same grounds as the Salem witch trials, where everyone accused of being a witch was completely unable to prove that they were not a witch, because it was essentially just the mere accusation enough was proof at that point. So we cannot revert back to this guilt until you're guilty until you're proven innocent. You must be innocent until proven guilty, as a point of law and a point of civilization not crumbling before us. To do otherwise violates the foundational principles of our nation, in which the government serves the people, and by which public schools as government entities therefore serve the people by extension. And in this case, the specific people the schools are serving are the parents. They are the voters. They are the citizens in this. They are the fully legal entities in the situation that are involved, because legal precedence treats children as subunits of their parents. This is why if your child breaks someone's window, you have to pay for it as the parent. Or if somebody assaults your child and there is some sort of settlement monetarily, you collect that payment in many courts. Sometimes they award it to the child, but in many cases, the parent will be able to collect on behalf of their child for those assaults. And because this is a thing, because those children are usually recognized in courts as legal subunits of their parents, then the rights of the parent have to subsume the rights of the child. They include the rights of the child, but they override the rights of the child as well, which is why even in custody battles, the kid can be screaming, I want to go with daddy, but mom's legal rights and claim on the child will override that. And now you'll have a split, a custody battle going on where the child wants to be with the other parent, not the one they're assigned to. And it's up to the, parent and that child to convince the court otherwise, which is just a whole nother mess that we'll need a whole nother video to talk about the despicable actions of family courts. So with that in mind, the rights of the parent have to come first. And again, when you combine all of the other things that have gone on recently to make parents lose faith in the school system, this is definitely not a step in the right direction. If they think, now, not only do you have these crazy TikTok teachers exposing my children to ideas I don't want them exposed to at their age, but they're exposing them to these ideas, and now it's written into their bylaws that they hide it from me. This is gonna, no, that is not gonna end well. I mean, we can already see where it's not ended well as parents find the graphic novels with sexual content of any kind in the school libraries. They're finding all sorts of things that have been going on in the schools that they had a blind eye turned to until COVID and the distance learning really gave them a front row seat to it. That being said, the proposals past this don't seem to be too bad. And what I mean by that is, there's nothing in any of these things that dictate referring to the student to some sort of psychological evaluation for pursuit of medical treatment. So other than, define the rights of the parents, which is just a non-starter from the start, we have social transition being done within the school. And if that's being done with parent permission and parent consent, that's a good thing. Now, and what I mean by that is that, it'll give the child the affirmation, it gives them the chance to explore this, and it gives them the ability to actually begin to live as the opposite gender, and maybe they realize that they're mistaken and go back, or they don't. Part of the social transition, as far as implementation goes, is, well, let's keep their actual legal name on the documents and everything. They have to write it on their work until, their name is legally changed. But I already call Joseph Joey. I call Robert Bert. I call, what's another common one? Susan Sue. Brianna gets called Anna or Bree. It's nothing to call a kid by another name. So if they want to show up to school and you have Robert, who now wants to be Robin and is going to be presented as female and wearing, female attire, it is nothing for me to refer to Robert as Robin and do my best to follow the visual cues they are giving me as to whether I am using he and she, or he and him, or she and her. Anything beyond that, you're getting into that Q plus territory, and I really don't think we need to be humoring anything other than, he, him, she, her, worst case scenario, they, them. But anything beyond that, you're now inventing words, and we don't need to go there as regulating that for schools, because it just does not work with grammar class. So let's respect the rules of grammar and use the pronouns and prepositions that we have currently. So they can begin to socially transition, and, no big deal. It literally changes nothing for the other students to have a student in a dress who normally wouldn't be in a dress, or to have a girl being called by a male name or a boy being called by a female name, and trying to act the opposite role. We're going to use the term opposite and address Dr. Souza's objection to opposite later on, because the sexes are even closer linked than what he suggested. But opposite is, the term we'll use for that. So, let them act out as this, transgender. Now, normally we would refer to this as cross-dressing. If you have because let's face it, children don't have a sexuality unless they are being abused in some way. So they can't be truly transsexual. They are being transgender at this point, or are simply, cross-dressing to, look the way they want to look. And some of it stops there. Like, oh, it's just a fascination with, the girls have such prettier clothes, or I like the way the boys' clothes look. I have met women who strictly like to wear men's clothes because they find them more comfortable, more rugged, and more durable, and it fits their lifestyle better. And we have also, seen, when I was a kid in school, we had what we refer to as the metrosexuals, which were boys who would like buy girls' shirts and wear their girls' dress shirts because they were softer and nicer with their suits and things like that. So that's nothing really new going on here. But when it comes to integrating this into the schools, um, again, it's nothing to put in, the student's new preferred name as a nickname and try to use the appropriate pronouns. In fact, you could even put that into the chart, you know, Robert, aka Robin, she dash her last name, and be done with it. And then, they will still sign their formal name on their papers, on their tests, on their standardized exams. Anything that gets paired up with their social security number and their student ID number all stays on their legal names as they move forward. Not very hard at all. You release them to lunch, blah, blah, blah. The only places where you really ever divide your students by boys and girls is for sex ed and, for things like bathrooms, lockers, field trips, and sports. In which case, because we are not going to involve trying to push medical treatments on students as part of this, we are only doing social transition in the schools. We are not doing medical transition in the schools. It is therefore appropriate to let the students interact as whatever gender they prefer or whatever gender they choose. And for some of them, that may be completely androgynous. And there's your they, them going to work here. But when it comes to these others, we have the sex divisions for reasons. If you just look at the sheer physicality difference between boys, even teenage boys and grown women, there's a huge physicality difference. Dr. Souza uses in his example, you get a linebacker off the football team and you've got some kid that's 6'3" and weighs 300 pounds. What exactly is a 5'1" woman going to do to physically control that child if he gets his attitude in some kind of way and decides to act out about it? There's a physical difference going on here. That being said, since we also have to kind of recognize that some of the kids will have dangly bits and others will not, we have to kind of divide along those lines. Therefore, what I would recommend being is that while they are able to present as the opposite gender and interact fully as those opposite genders, what you're going to get is still birth, sex separated, bathrooms, lockers, and everything else. Now, by all means, if the facilities are present, do offer these children the option of using a private bathroom, a single stall bathroom, if you will. That should be an option all students have if they want to wait for that level of privacy, but eventually students like this who have that level of privacy. But the school's safest way is to ignore anything other than the social transition of the gender. We ignore the sex aspect of this change because that becomes a physical transition, and that's not something that the school is in any way positioned to address. It's the same way we don't want to address most things dealing with sex and children in schools. So we're going to take a firm step back from that. We will let them interact with each other upon their genders, and they will use the bathroom of their of their birth sex. That hasn't changed. Their equipment hasn't changed. So yes, you'll have a male student presenting as a girl in the boys' bathroom using the male urinal at times or using the stall at times in that case. And you will have the female at birth student in the girls' bathroom doing what they do in the stalls. I guess maybe you would want to install a urinal then on both and make those universal other than the assignments. Then again, it does beg the question of, why is it tradition? Why are we still making traditional male bathrooms in new schools? Why are not all of these bathrooms stalls with walls that go all the way to the ground and doors that actually close to provide privacy? Why are we still doing these outdated, semi-private bathrooms? And men don't deserve any privacy when they go to the bathroom. Why are guys just like, it wouldn't take anything to put those urinals inside of the stalls themselves. They already have the divider walls usually. Like, well, let's maybe remodel the bathrooms, make that more palatable for everyone. All bathrooms get stalls, nice, floor to ceiling dividers and all of that. Let's get on top of that. Locker rooms. You do not want a teenage girl going into the teenage boys' locker room. Setting aside the risk of assault, they're gonna have teenage boy. We all know how guys behave in the locker room, and we all know the shenanigans that the guys get up to in the guys' locker room. Ladies, if you're listening, I don't know what it's like in the ladies' locker room, but if it's anything like the guys, you don't want to have male students in there despite them presenting as female or girls anyways. So let's keep everybody going into their birth sex locker room. At the end of the day, whether you have the dangly bits and you are changing into jeans or a dress, doesn't matter, because we're going to treat you as though you are still that, you've only been socially transitioned. There is no physical transition, and be done with it. So, that takes care of bathrooms, lockers, school trips, same deal. We wouldn't be trying to filter out gay male students and having them sleep in the same room as the girls, or segregating them out to room separately from with each other or with each other, or trying to control that at all. We don't, stick our noses into that as educators. We, if we have an overnight school trip, you room all the boys together, you room all the girls together. There's no reason for that to change just because one of the boys is wearing a dress and one of the girls is now going by the name Peter. Let's just keep everything separated on birth sex. And again, because we're only supporting the social transition of this student, they are still going, at the end of each day, they are still going to be treated and exposed to their birth sex. And you might say, well, that really defeats the purpose of and idea of that social transition. No, 90% of the time, they are getting that social transition being treated as the gender they want to present as. They're getting it 90% of the time. The other 10% is just dealing with the realities of life, the same way that Buck Angel still has to go to a gynecologist, and Blair White, as we mentioned earlier, still has to go to a urologist. This is what it is. You have to deal with the reality of your situation, and at the end of the day, that is why it's called gender dysmorphia, is because no matter how hard it tries to get buried, there are still things there. And even when you get into the physical changes, the physical transitioning, you are still going to deal with the dysmorphia aspect of it. You will still deal with, in the case for most male to female transgenders, some level of, can you see my Adam's apple? Am I developing shadow? Despite the estrogen treatments, your fingers are not going to suddenly grow longer. Your hands are not going to get more delicate. You are going to deal with the fact that you were born male and developed male for a while. Even if you get all of the surgeries, they would still find things about their body that they're insecure about and remind them of that birth gender. It just is what it is. And if you speak with people who have transitioned the way I have, they will tell you the same thing of, yeah, I feel better because I can interact with society as, the gender they want to interact with. But at the end of the day, they're still struggling with that gender dysmorphia. It doesn't go away. The treatment just makes it easier to deal with, which is one of the things I really think we can't lose sight on, is that at the end of the day, has usually been a mental illness, and we're simply seeking to treat it. And no treatment is ever perfect for something like this. So we don't want to prescribe things that go above and beyond. Now, one of the other issues I rose up with this onto why things have to be done with parental consent and it has to be controlled through the parent is that kids will be kids, and teachers have to service these children, providing them with the education and interacting with them. We don't want to create situations where the children have full control of the classroom, and that's exactly what we will do if the child can show up and say, Monday, I want you to refer to me as female pronouns. Tuesday, I want you to use male pronouns and flip back and forth, and they're only doing it to get the teacher's goat because the teacher finds some sort of religious objection to this or what have you. I'm not saying that the teachers who are religious should not have to, humor the children, but I do think that there needs to be, the parent involvement so that, it's not becoming abusive and becoming a power play in the child's behalf. I just feel that there's room for abuse there, and having things routed through the parents and the guidance counselor is the best way to deal with this. And I'm going to come out and say this: LGBT community completely accept, you do you, fam. The Q plus community, the Q plus is where you guys lose me. Like a lot of this just seems like a complicated way to express what you like and what your personal taste is. And I'm sorry, I cannot take something like otherkin seriously. Somebody who identifies as a cat and insists on being treated as a cat is either completely fucking nuts or an attention whore. And I will die on that hill. That being said, the rest of this, as I've explained, seems like a pretty fair way to deal with it to me. If nothing else, maybe we need to start looking at our culturally divided restrooms, as it were. And again, maybe why do we have grouped bathrooms like that? Why are all of our bathrooms not, individual stalls walled in with a toilet and a private sink, to which exits into a, common area with mirrors where you can, or even have the mirror in there too on the back of the door? Why do we have bathrooms designed the way that we do? Why don't we redo the bathrooms where they're all unisex and they're just in there in rows? Let's say 5 on each side, and each bathroom has 10 stalls, and that's enough to service everyone. And if it's not, then you have them have a dozen stalls or 20 stalls. Why do we have these gender divided bathrooms to begin with? And, obviously there'd be the concern of, some sort of creep getting in there, like what happened in Loudoun County. But at the same time, if there's no place where that is, if it's not a place to hide, if they are exposed like that, if they are, all the stall doors are towards the outside of the building, and the inner wall is actually where the backs of the stalls are, and you have everything put through, think of it like a horse stable almost in design. That would avoid that issue in the first place, because there's no place to hide the assault. It'll be there. If anyone else is using the bathroom, no matter what gender, sex, whatever have you they are, they're going to see what's going on and respond to it. And so there's fixes for all these issues and all these questions. And if we can send $40 billion to the Ukraine, $40 billion to the Ukraine, well, then we can employ some people here in the United States overhauling the bathrooms to solve the problem when it really comes down to it, if the solution of sending everybody to their board sex bathroom is not good enough. That being said, I really think the board sex bathroom is a good enough solution, because it doesn't over immerse the child into any one given thing. When you want a child to learn a new language, immersion is the fastest way to learn that new language. Immersion will be the fastest way for them to learn the ups and downs of that gender. But you don't want them to completely lose touch with who they were previously, just in case it is a phase. And in some cases, Sometimes it's a phase. And don't be blinded to, the fact that it's not like a permanent thing for everyone. There's an entire subreddit devoted to detransitioners. There's, a growing attempt in YouTube for detransitioners and their stories to come through, um, and how basically they've made permanent changes to their bodies that they can't change anymore. And they're trying to get their stories out there as words of caution to young people before they go under the knife or start taking hormones to physically transition when they are um, not of age of consent, because they didn't have that extended social transition to let them know that, hey, this isn't really for me, or that time to really think about it. So that's my take on it. Let me know what you think on this. Those are my solutions. At the end of the day, the right of the parent has to override. We have to respect the rights of the students. And, despite the fact that I am not a socialist, sometimes the needs of the many do have to outweigh the needs of the few on some things. And when you're talking about providing the services to the students in education, you have to provide them with the opportunity to do sports, to use the bathrooms, to have locker rooms. So you need to, work towards the good of many on this. And if necessary, maybe we'll have to develop a third set of sports where it's for all of the intersex, because intersex is something as old as humanity itself, happens every so often as a genetic fluke. So, the idea of having to deal with intersex is nothing new in history. It's just usually those babies were either terminated in infancy after they were born because they were considered deformed, or they went on to, interact in society and no one made a big deal about it. They just interacted under whatever gender they presented as, despite their birth sex. You see where I'm going with this? This has historically been the solution that we have used. And in the words of Thomas Sowell, the last 30 years or so have been an exercise of creating solutions for problems that weren't broken in the first place. Or let's see if I can pull this quote up real quick. Let's see if I can pull this quote up and get it right, because Thomas Sowell is a brilliant man, and more people should be familiar with his words of wisdom. Here we are. Much of the social history of the Western world over the past 3 decades has been a history of replacing what worked with what sounded good. So, so far dividing everyone by their birth sex for, the bathrooms, lockers, sports and everything has worked well. And putting people by their identification together sounds good. Definitely sounds like it's more attuned to their feelings. There are some physical realities in the way of that. And, we don't want to be putting kids in a position in which we are encouraging them to make permanent, unchangeable, unalterable changes to their bodies and their futures before they are of adult consent. We should not be considering the ability for someone to determine their future chances at having children, or, lobbing off body parts of any type, before they're even considered old enough to exercise their other rights as legal citizens, whether it's signing student loans, owning a firearm, smoking a cigarette, having a drink. 18 plus should be for all these physical transitions. And then the social transitions is what we can support and help with at the school level to show these students that they will be accepted for who they are, but for their own legal protection and their own protection as human beings, we need to put off that physical transition until they are the age of majority and can consent. Blair White has a quote out there that I would end this note on, that if you're not old enough to consent to sex, you're not old enough to consent to having your sex changed. And really, I think that hits the end of it on the physical transition. Schools working on social transition and, making that and enabling it to be a thing. is definitely, something I can agree with. And now I want to go up to the final section here and talk about biology for a bit. Because my college of enrollment, the guidance counselors there were in the business of getting business for the college and selling degrees to people, they lied through their teeth about what my degree and line of studies would entail. I was told they had a secondary education degree system and it was all set up. And I would, be able to go in, take some classes that would teach me how to be a teacher, learn about some stuff that was useful for teachers to learn, and I would be on my way. The reality of the matter was that they had requirements for me taking upper level science courses and later on social science courses. So I'm in, say, things like developmental biology with pre-med students. So I've got a little bit more edge on like that science instruction than your typical teacher does, as well as a little bit more on edge for economic and other instruction than those teachers typically do as well. So I just want to kind of focus in on the biological differences between men and women. And one of the most interesting things that I have read, and these are some really cool things, there's and these are things you should look up yourselves. Look up the concept of the 7 daughters of Eve. It sounds like a religious thing, but it's actually a scientific thing where they can trace back the mitochondrial DNA, mitochondria, the powerhouse of your cells, because you only inherit those from your mother, because, the egg gets all the mitochondria and the sperm has a supply of ATP, then dies because it doesn't have mitochondria. So it either fertilizes or dies. There's malodisposability in a nutshell for you. So the mitochondrial DNA can be traced back to 7, source women, and that's as far back as we can go. And those are the 7 daughters of Eve. So we can trace back all origins of all humanity back towards 7 particular women as origins for that mitochondrial DNA before it starts to go in other directions. The next major concept that you should explore is referred to as Adam's curse. And this is that the Y chromosome is a experimental block for nature. Because it has no mate with it, for the crossing over and other genetic occurrences that help repair mutated genes and everything on your other chromosomes, and what even happens with the X chromosome in women. Because there's never a second Y chromosome there for it to pair with and do that correction, the Y chromosome becomes the fastest one that can mutate and evolve. And one of the effects of this is that on any given bell curve, males are less clustered at the center on the average and more clustered outward with wider deviations from the center. So that's the reason why, like, if you look at things like just sheer physical attractiveness, as rated, most women will be rated by men right around the 5 and 6, with little deviations out away from them. Whereas when men are rated, you got lots of 3s and 4s, lots of 5s and 6s, even a few 7s in there, but there's also lots of 2s and 1s, and lots of 9s and 10s, comparatively speaking, on that rating. And we see the same thing with the results on intelligence tests, the same thing with results on like height distribution, just in many factors. Men are more widespread with greater outliers, and that's part of the reason why, if you look at, like even prison, if you take the 95th percentile amount of women who are violent and put them, in prison, so that top 95th percentile or higher, 5%, those very most violent, very most antisocial of women will still only be equivalent to about the 75th percentile of men. So the upper 25% on men are as violent as like the baseline of that 95 percentile on women, just because we stretch the violence spectrum way further than most women normally do. That's not to say that one woman can't be way more violent than any man ever born. It just becomes less likely to be so. And when you think about, what's in the news recently and everything else, this really holds up at observation because, who are your killers? Who are your mass killers? It's always a dude. 95% of the time, it's a dude. And that's why, and part of the thought of this with the Adam's curse is that the Y chromosome, being vulnerable to all of these mutations and changes, carries out all of these outliers and creates all this genetic variation. However, it's also got one gene on it where if you shut that gene down, the entire fertilized zygote can develop as completely female with no male secondary sexual characteristics, and they will simply be born as a sterile female. And don't think of it like anything weird like that House episode where like the teenage, like the little boy was immune to testosterone and turned into a supermodel girl. Not the case. This is literally, the Y chromosome never gets turned on, never gets expressed. Everything develops normally, just it's all female except for the chromosomes, and nothing can be done about that. That's the genetic makeup. You have now an XY female who is there. And I point this out because I've said before that, there are genetic flukes that have produced an intersex in between the two sexes before, and that has happened throughout our history. So the idea of dealing with transgenders or a third sex is nothing new. It's just something that we've always ignored before, because entering into that field as an option or an opt-in on the physical sense of having access to surgeries and treatments to bring that about has never before been an option. But there have always been people that have been stuck between two worlds like that. And the only way to deal with anyone in any of these situations on the LGBT community or with exceptionalities where they have mental exceptionalities is with understanding and caring of each other. And the same thing needs to go for those who are not exceptional in any way. I have witnessed and I have seen, kids hop onto the idea that, there has to be something wrong with them or else they aren't special too. I have, seen perfectly healthy kids, start in 6th grade, and by the time they are in 12th grade, they are desperate to have some sort of diagnosis, so they aren't the only ones without a diagnosis, so that there's something special and unique about them. And it turns into kids coming up and introducing themselves as their diagnosis. I have literally had a child come up to me and say, "Hi, I'm gay," before they said anything else. Now, yes, this child was on the spectrum, but you don't want that to be their identity. You want their identity to be who they are, the whole of their person. So we need to be careful that, in the realm of being supportive of students, we don't lose track of replacing who they are as a whole person with one aspect of their identity. Just because Robert wants to be called Robin and is wearing the dress to school doesn't mean that Robin can also love football and be a regular boy on all other aspects. Just because Susan actually likes football and wants to play sports doesn't mean Susan's any less of a girl. We don't want to be too judgmental with this. We want to accept our children as whole individuals, our students as whole individuals, and be there to support them and not make them feel pressured to go one way or the other. And that's where I, usually follow my expression with, the TikTok crew of strange birds that, I'm constantly concerned that, they are focusing too much on the one topic and, trying to work that into their interactions with their students to where they are trying to influence things in the process of being accepted. And they're bringing a focus down on something that is making the students feel like they have to be different in that kind of way in order to be accepted and thought of as a special and unique individual who is valued. We really need to make sure that the students understand that, normal, being what normal is still special in and of itself, and they don't have to be abnormal in any way to be special and cared for, cared about, and appreciated. The beauty of the poetry that the student can write is not changed by their orientation or identity. The value of the science that a student is capable of doing and going on to do as an adult is not changed by any of their indelible characteristics or even of their indelible ones. A student who chooses to dress goth is not suddenly, more special than a student that is peppy and on all the cheer teams and everything. We need to strongly encourage our students not to take these identities that they have and let that subsume the greater individual as a whole, and really encourage them to be more than just, the expression of one idea. And that's what I want to close on, is that, at the end of the day, us as educators, our role is to help kids grow, help them achieve, and help bring them into the world as functional adults who are ready to enter the world, enter the workforce, and flourish. And we need to make sure that our other things, our other concerns, our desire for them to, realize their self-esteem and their self-worth and self-actualization doesn't get in the way of that goal. And that we as educators remember our space and our place in society, and that we don't try to interfere with what should be the role of the parent and the domain of the parent. Because at the end of the day, as I have continued to say, educators, parents, and students are the team working together to get the student to that end goal. And we don't need to have, the parents and the teachers or educators fighting over, the job each other's going to do. That has to be a teamwork thing. Otherwise it all comes tumbling down. So on that note, this has been Rob with Cruising and Musing. I'm sure that there's going to be some sort of angry comment down below by the time we get to the end of this. So if you've listened to all this time, I want to thank you. Please do leave a like or a dislike on this and give me a comment below, especially if you give me a dislike. Tell me why you think I'm an idiot, please.